Royal historian Hugo Vickers, who was very close to Queen Elizabeth, has just released a new book, and what it allegedly reveals about the Queen's final years is sending shockwaves through royal circles, painting a picture of silent heartbreak, quiet suspicion, and a family bond slowly cracking. Behind palace doors that were never meant to open to the public, and at the center of it all, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Because according to these explosive claims, this wasn't just a royal exit. It wasn't just a modern step back. It was something far more personal inside the walls of the monarchy. Something that reportedly changed the Queen's own behavior, her trust, and even the way she spoke to her own grandson. And it all begins with a chilling shift, silence where warmth once lived. Because after Harry and Meghan left royal life, sources quoted in the book suggest the Queen didn't just feel disappointed, she felt exposed, as if private family space was no longer private at all. Reports claim that when Harry called her after the departure, something unusual started happening inside those conversations. The Queen, who once spoke freely with him, allegedly changed the entire structure of those calls, not out of anger, but caution, even fear of misinterpretation. She reportedly made sure she was never alone on calls with Harry. A lady-in-waiting was always present in the room, and that detail alone becomes a question that hangs in the air. What changed so drastically that even a grandmother needed witnesses inside a private family conversation? According to Hugo Vickers' account, it wasn't about distrust in love, it was about distrust in leaks, narratives, and headlines. After the Netflix interviews and explosive revelations that followed the royal exit, the Queen reportedly became careful, measured in a way even those closest to her had rarely seen before. Every word, every pause, every sentence suddenly carried weight beyond family, it carried institutional risk. And then comes the emotional rupture.
I do happen to know that the Queen always used to make sure that she had somebody with her whenever she saw those two, for the reasons that we've been talking about, that they might be taking photographs or, I don't know, recording or anything they might be doing, and she was, very upset by the whole thing. And that's what I really find unforgivable.
She reportedly became cautious and no longer fully trusted private discussions, fearing that conversations could appear in the tabloids the next day. It showed how much the relationship had changed after the royal exit. Many people saw Harry's departure as a normal royal transition, but for the Queen, it felt personal. She reportedly felt emotionally deserted by a grandson she loved dearly. Emotionally deserted. That phrase alone cuts through the palace calm like glass. Because this wasn't just protocol anymore, it was personal grief wrapped in royal restraint. And yet, publicly, the Queen stayed composed. She never attacked, never retaliated. Instead, she did what she always did. She absorbed the storm in silence. Then came the Oprah interview, the global moment that reportedly left the monarchy stunned. According to Vickers' claims, the Queen was taken aback by the allegations and revelations aired by Harry and Meghan. But even then, her response was famously restrained. Some recollections may vary. A sentence so simple yet so loaded, it became its own form of royal defense. Not denial, not confrontation, just controlled distance. But behind that calm exterior, the book suggests something more complex was unfolding. Emotional confusion mixed with institutional pressure. A monarch trying to protect the crown while quietly processing claims made by her own grandson on a global stage. And then another layer of tension emerges, Harry's role before the exit. The Queen, according to these accounts, reportedly believed Harry still had purpose inside the monarchy. She saw him as someone who connected with people in a way few royals could. His work with veterans, especially through the Invictus Games, reportedly filled her with pride. She even supported it publicly, appearing in promotional material. But then came the shift, the departure, the decision to step away. And here, the tone inside the palace reportedly turned from pride to confusion. Because in private conversations described by Vickers, the Queen allegedly struggled to understand why someone who was thriving in royal service would walk away from it. There were even remarks framed as private reflections suggesting disbelief at how quickly roles changed. One moment, senior royal responsibilities. Next moment, completely outside the institution. That contrast reportedly felt almost unreal to her. And then the most controversial layer begins to surface, the early concerns about Meghan Markle. According to the book, the Queen allegedly advised Harry to slow down the relationship before marriage, suggesting more time was needed to understand the situation fully. Not opposition, but caution. a pause, a royal instinct for patience. But Harry moved forward regardless, and that decision, according to the narrative in Vickers' account, created a quiet emotional shift in the Queen. Not anger, not public rejection, but something colder, emotional, stepping back. A subtle distance that grew without announcement. And as rumors, opinions, and palace whispers multiplied, the relationship inside the family reportedly began to fracture in ways that were not visible on the surface, but deeply felt behind closed doors. And just when things seemed like they couldn't become more sensitive, another claim surfaces that intensifies the controversy around Meghan's early days inside the royal household, setting the stage for even deeper tensions that would follow. And behind palace walls, where formality is everything, and emotion is rarely allowed to speak freely, the narrative becomes even more unsettling, because according to Hugo Vickers' claims, what began as quiet concern slowly evolved into something closer to emotional distance, as if an invisible line had been crossed that could never fully be undone. The book suggests that after Harry and Meghan's wedding, there were moments of subtle tension that never made headlines at the time, but reportedly lingered inside the royal household like unresolved echoes. One of the most controversial claims is that the Queen allegedly had reservations about Meghan Markle's wedding dress, not in a public way, not as an official statement, but as a private opinion shared within palace circles. It was said to be too modern, too bold, and not fully aligned with royal tradition, especially for a bride who had been previously married. And while this remains a claim rather than confirmed fact, in the context of royal protocol, even the smallest aesthetic disagreement becomes a symbolic message about acceptance, belonging, and tradition. But even then, the Queen attended the wedding. She smiled, she performed her duty, she maintained the image expected of her. Because for her, monarchy always came before emotion in public. But privately, according to Vickers' account, questions lingered. Not loud questions, but quiet ones that grow in silence when never answered. And then comes one of the most explosive allegations in the narrative, the claim involving Meghan and palace staff behavior. According to the book, there were complaints about Meghan's interactions with staff members, including a gardener at Windsor, and this reportedly escalated to a point where the Queen personally intervened. The story suggests she directly addressed Meghan in a firm moment, emphasizing respect towards staff, reinforcing that in the royal household, service and dignity are inseparable. The alleged moment is described almost like a breaking point of tone inside the palace. No shouting, no scandalous confrontation, just a sharp reminder of hierarchy and expectation delivered in the Queen's unmistakable authority. And yet, despite all of this, the monarchy did not publicly fracture. It stayed intact on the surface. That is what makes this story so layered, because everything reportedly happened underneath silence. Then comes another emotional fracture point: duty versus personal choice. According to Vickers, the Queen struggled to understand Harry's decision to step away from royal duties. In her worldview, duty was not optional. It was inherited, lifelong, and non-negotiable. She had lived through war, crisis, political transformation, and personal loss, always while remaining in service. So the idea of leaving that structure voluntarily reportedly felt foreign to her understanding of responsibility. In private reflections quoted in the narrative, there is even a striking comparison made about Harry's role changing from senior royal responsibilities to something far more domestic, framed in a way that suggests disappointment mixed with disbelief. And then comes the emotional core of the entire story, the sadness. Because according to Vickers, the Queen did not respond with rage or public condemnation. Instead, she reportedly responded with something far quieter, emotional withdrawal, a dignified silence that carried more weight than any speech could. She continued her duties, she continued her role, but internally, the narrative suggests something had shifted in how she viewed the situation, not as rebellion, but as loss. And that loss becomes even more human when described through the lens of distance. A grandmother watching her grandson build a life far away, conversations becoming less frequent, public statements replacing private moments, and trust slowly replaced by caution. Even the media pressure surrounding Harry and Meghan reportedly added strain, as every interview, every headline, every statement required institutional response. For a monarch who preferred stability over reaction, this constant cycle of public explanation reportedly became exhausting. And then the book delivers one of its most emotionally loaded interpretations, that the Queen remained deeply conflicted. On one side, her duty to the monarchy, on the other, her love for Harry. And between those two forces, there was no easy resolution. She reportedly never stopped stop loving him. That is the constant thread running through all accounts. Even disagreement did not erase affection. Even distance did not erase history. But affection does not always prevent disappointment, and that contradiction sits at the center of this entire narrative. Love on one side, institution on the other, and no bridge strong enough to fully hold both at the same time. As the final years of Queen Elizabeth's reign unfolded, the book claims she carried that emotional complexity quietly, never allowing it to become public conflict. She continued to represent stability, continuity, and calm, even as internal family dynamics reportedly grew more complicated. And yet, despite all the claims, interpretations, and controversies, one thing remains consistent across every account described: the Queen's desire for dignity above everything else, even in disagreement, even in sadness, even in disappointment. Because for her, legacy was not shaped by private conflict, it was shaped by restraint. And so the story ends not with resolution, but with lingering silence, questions left unanswered, perspectives still debated, and a royal family still defined as much by what is said as by what is never allowed to be spoken aloud.